The paper has been prepared as a collaborative exercise, and some of our colleagues are here. Joe Gilbride is here, Cynthia is here, and our colleagues in Lagos, we are hoping, will be represented by their colleagues in the government. And there were people from Delhi as well that have been in and out here. So we hope to look forward to your response on this. This paper is really, the rationale for this is that climate risk assessment is a prerequisite for any serious climate action plans and should be grounded in some climate science, and that hazard or risk assessment, climate risk assessment, depending on what disciplinary base has been doing it, has had either a bias towards climate hazards, which is really when it comes from the domain of climate scientists, or has been focused on vulnerabilities assessment if it comes from the domain of policymakers or planners, and or if it is done by public administrators, then it focuses on adaptive capacity, which is really looking at cities agency. But none of these are enough by themselves, so this is like an effort to bring a multidisciplinary view to climate risk to really trigger action. And as the IPCC work shows that there's a disproportionate focus on climate hazards, so this is trying to diversify that base. As a methodology, we basically define this new framework for climate risk assessment, and there in Cynthia's outfit at NASA in Columbia University, there have been scientists who have been doing climate models, and they are working on scaling this down for the city, making it more city specific, so that the mayors and decision makers have something tractable that is relevant for their local context. And so we derive a framework, and then that is deployed on 4 cities, 2 of which we are going to discuss. Just to give a quick sense of what we mean by hazards, it's really around the 3 major vectors, which is temperature, precipitation, and sea level where relevant. And it looks at really observed and projected data. Next is vulnerability, essentially to look at the city characteristics and what is the composition of the city depending on Lagos or New York. The inherent characteristics of a city determine risk, much of which gets neglected in the hazard literature. People who look at climate vectors, essentially. And agency, which really tries to understand whether a government is able or willing to respond, and what are the constraints, some of which were discussed yesterday, tensions between federal and local governments, resource issues, and a host of other things. So it's a simple framework. It's constructed in this manner because data often is unevenly available across cities. If you want to look at African cities, it's often difficult to know precisely what the vulnerability vectors are. But as it turns out, we try to define risk as a product of these 3 because if the climate forcings on a given city are X, and those are deployed in a city like New York, which has better infrastructure versus Lagos, where 70% of the population is in slums, the impact should be very different. And then if New York decides to respond, or Lagos takes the lead as it has in the C40 arrangement, if the city is willing to respond, then that would perhaps reduce the risk. So it is the interaction of these 3 that is determining the climate risk. And just to give a sense, so heat waves, coastal storms, floods would fit in climate hazards, and vulnerability would be a function of things like the size of the city, the density of the population, the proportion of the poor, the contribution to national GDP, and adaptive capacity. We are measuring through variables like, does the city have a comprehensive risk assessment plan? Does the mayor's office deploy resources towards these issues? So these are the 4 cities: New York, Buenos Aires, Lagos, and Delhi, and they were picked as they are all part of C40. And we have, as part of our research network, researchers located in all these, and we are very happy that we have been able to engage our researchers despite the distances.